Do you think every family has a villain, or is it more complicated?
When I told my parents I needed life-saving treatment, they didn't cry, didn't offer to sell a car or take out a loan, or even ask me how scared I was. They sat there, my mother with her coffee mug balanced on her knee, my father scrolling through his tablet like I hadn't just dropped a goddamn bomb in the middle of their pristine kitchen, and after a few moments of awkward silence, my mom said, "Sweetie, we just can't afford that right now," like she was apologizing for not getting me the right kind of birthday cake. 8 weeks later, they paid $62,000 for my brother Trevor's wedding in Cabo San Lucas. And now, months later, they've been texting me with lines like, "Why have you become so cold?" Cold? I'm not cold. I just finally stopped trying to get warm by sitting in a house where the fire only burns for someone else. I was 31, working full-time as a graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing firm that paid just enough to cover my rent and groceries, and maybe a weekend trip with friends if I planned months ahead. I didn't live extravagantly, I never have, but when the fatigue started creeping in, when the joint pain came, when I couldn't make it through a normal Tuesday without feeling like my body was turning to stone from the inside out, I knew something was wrong. At first, I thought it was stress. Then anemia. Then, maybe just getting older. But blood tests don't lie. After too many specialist visits and too many hours in sterile waiting rooms with daytime TV humming in the background, I got the diagnosis: lupus. Autoimmune. Chronic. Treatable, but only if you catch it early and manage it properly. Otherwise, it eats at your organs like termites in an old house. Slowly. Quietly. Brutally. I didn't cry when the doctor told me. I remember nodding, my hands folded in my lap, looking calm. On the inside, I was on fire. The medication that could slow the damage, the one that had the best odds of keeping me functional, wasn't covered by my insurance, because of course it wasn't. The monthly cost? Around $2,000. Not including monitoring appointments, infusions, labs. I ran the numbers a dozen different ways. I sold off my winter trip fund, canceled my gym membership, even offered to sell my car. Still came up short. I was desperate, and desperation makes you bold. I drove the hour out to my parents' house. I hadn't told them anything yet, not about the pain, the missed days at work, the mornings I sat in the shower trying to will my fingers to close around the shampoo bottle. When I arrived, the house looked the same as it always had: white siding, blue shutters, front porch with hanging ferns, and that ridiculous garden gnome my mother refused to throw away. It smelled like cinnamon candles and lemon cleaner, my mom's comfort combo. I sat at the kitchen table and laid it all out: the diagnosis, the urgency, the cost, the reality. I didn't dramatize it. I just told them what it was. I don't know what I expected. Maybe shock. Maybe an outpouring of support, a hug, a vow that they'd help me no matter what. Maybe some tears. What I got instead was a slow blink from my dad and a nervous, pursed lip look from my mom. She reached for her coffee, took a sip, and said, exact words, "That's a lot of money, honey. We're trying to be careful with our finances right now." I sat there, blinking, trying to understand what I'd just heard. Was this a negotiation? A rejection? A stall tactic? I started to stammer something, offering to pay them back, to show them my bank statements, to swear on whatever they needed me to, that this wasn't some fluke or exaggeration. My dad finally looked up from his tablet. "You're a strong girl, Erin. You'll figure it out. You always do." That line, "you always do," landed like a slap across the face. Like being competent had become a liability. Like because I'd always been the one who got the A's, held the jobs, never needed to be bailed out of jail or rehab or yet another impulsive business scheme, I'd somehow forfeited my right to ask for help when I was actually drowning. I drove home that night with the windows down, trying to keep from hyperventilating. I didn't cry. I felt numb. I felt like I'd asked for a life raft and gotten a lecture on how to swim harder. But somewhere under that numbness, a seed was planted, one of those slow-growing, deep-rooted kinds. Not hate. Not even anger yet. Just a new, sharp awareness. I'd always known Trevor was the golden child, the one they babed, the one they forgave, the one whose mistakes became learning moments. But now, that knowledge had weight. Now, it came with consequences. I tried to make peace with it. I really did. I worked extra freelance gigs, cut every cost I could, and started a GoFundMe even though I felt sick doing it. People I barely knew donated. Strangers shared my story. Coworkers chipped in. But not my family. Not once. Then came the Instagram photos. It was a Thursday evening in late May, and I was lying on my couch, mid-flare-up, scrolling through stories on autopilot when I saw it, Trevor and Ashley on a beach, barefoot, kissing under an arch made of white orchids and silk ribbon. Hashtag Cabo wedding, hashtag dream come true, hashtag blessed. It wasn't a surprise they'd gone big. Ashley always struck me as someone who thought simple meant cheap, and my parents had always enabled her like she was the daughter they never had. But what hit me in the gut wasn't just the location or the catered photos, it was the caption under a post from Ashley's bridal stylist, so honored to work this $60,000 stunner. Funded entirely by the groom's amazing parents. Talk about love. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't even rage, not yet. It was more like betrayal settling into my bloodstream, slow and acidic. They had the money. They had the damn money. But they decided I wasn't worth it. Or maybe they just didn't want to spend it on someone who wouldn't give them pretty pictures and smiling grandkids and a reason to brag to their friends. I didn't even get a text inviting me. Just a tag in a group photo from a cousin who thought I was there. I closed the app. I stared at the ceiling. I let my hands shake until they stopped. And then I decided, in that moment, that I was done trying to belong to a family that had already sold my place at the table for a beachfront buffet. But I wasn't going to scream or cry or beg. I wasn't going to send a long, sad email or try to guilt them into seeing what they'd done. I was going to get very, very quiet. And then I was going to get even. It didn't happen all at once, that slow unraveling of hope. It came in waves, like one of those cold, gray tides that creeps up before you realize the sands vanished from under your feet. After the wedding photos started circulating, it was impossible not to see the full picture, both literally and figuratively. It wasn't just the smiling couple against a sunset backdrop, or the coordinated bridal party in shades of cream and gold. It was the sheer scale of it, the carefully curated extravagance, the drone footage of the vows, the personalized cocktails with Ashley and Trevor's initials frozen in ice cubes, and the live band flown in from Nashville that played their first dance under string lights twinkling like something out of a Nicholas Sparks fever dream. And beneath every perfect photo, every glowing comment, was the same, gnawing truth. My parents had said no to my survival, but yes to celebration. I wanted to believe there was some nuance to it all, some reason that would explain the disparity, even if it didn't justify it. Maybe they'd gotten a last-minute windfall. Maybe Trevor and Ashley had somehow pitched in more than I thought. Maybe they didn't realize how bad things had gotten with me. But every theory I came up with collapsed under the weight of what I knew deep down. This wasn't an oversight. It was a decision. And not a new one. Looking back, it was always Trevor. Always. Even when we were kids, I was the one who did her homework, remembered birthdays, came home before curfew. Trevor wrecked his first car at 19, totaled it after sneaking out to meet a girl 2 towns over. My dad grounded him for a week, then helped him pick out a newer, better car the following weekend, framing it as a learning experience. When he flunked out of college the first time, they told friends it was because the program wasn't a good fit. When I graduated magna cum laude and paid off half my student loans on my own, my mom said, "That's great, sweetie," in the same tone she used when someone brought her the wrong salad. It was like being competent meant I didn't need anything, and that not needing anything made me less lovable. I used to think maybe it was unintentional, that I'd simply fallen into the role of the fixer, the self-starter, the one who didn't cause problems and therefore didn't need attention. But now, seeing $62,000 in photos and hashtags and matching his and hers robes embroidered with Mrs. Forever and Groomzilla, I couldn't pretend anymore. It wasn't unconscious. It was a pattern. It was a choice they kept making. The silence between us stretched thin over the weeks that followed. I didn't answer texts. I didn't call. I stopped liking their Facebook posts. I turned off story notifications. They noticed. My mother started sending little guilt-laced messages, full of chirpy concern. Hope you're feeling okay. Haven't heard from you in a bit. Trevor says you didn't respond to Ashley's thank you card. Everything okay? Miss our coffee chats, sweetie. And then, gradually, the tone shifted. My dad tried once. Let's not let small things create distance. We're family. Small things. I reread that line more times than I care to admit. I wondered if it would still be small if it had been him needing treatment. Or if I'd been the one getting married in Mexico with fireworks and a photo booth. I wanted to scream, to break the silence with fury, to send them every bill I'd received, every receipt, every insurance denial, every moment I'd laid on my bathroom floor unable to move because my joints locked up like rusted hinges. But I didn't. I let the silence grow, because silence was louder than anything I could have written. And in that silence, I began to notice something I hadn't before: freedom. The absence of pretending. No more forced smiles, no more pretending that I believed we were a close-knit family when the seams had been fraying for decades. But the void didn't stay quiet. Into it stepped Trevor like he always had, breezy and oblivious, texting me one afternoon like nothing had ever happened. Hey, Ash said you used a great site for guest lists. Mind sending it over? Also, Mom said you've been distant. What's going on? The casualness of it stunned me. As if I was a secretary in a family office. As if my value was transactional. As if I existed to provide services, connections, convenience, but not emotion. Not needs. Not anything that might require them to look in the mirror. I didn't answer. I didn't even open the message for 2 days. When I finally did, I typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, and then deleted that too. What could I even say that wouldn't come off as a bitter, jealous diatribe to someone who'd never known lack, never been told no, never had to consider that love in their family might have conditions? What could I say that would cut through the insulation of privilege and golden boy blindness? Eventually, I settled on a single line. I don't have it anymore. Best of luck. I sent it. Then blocked the thread. But the questions kept coming, not just from family, but from myself. Had I waited too long to confront them? Should I have spoken up sooner, back when the favoritism was still just emotional, not financial? Did I somehow contribute to this dynamic by always being the one who held it together? And more painfully, was it too late to salvage anything? I didn't know. But I did know that nothing was ever going to be the same. Because even if I forgave them, even if they begged on their knees tomorrow, I couldn't forget the night I sat in my car, staring at a wedding fireworks display on Instagram, wondering why my life wasn't worth the cost of one catering deposit. I couldn't forget that I'd been disposable. So I did what I had always done. I adapted. I picked up more freelance projects, learned to manage the fatigue, started tracking flare-ups and triggers more closely. I created spreadsheets of my medical bills, built a monthly budget that didn't rely on anyone else, and slowly started squirreling away money into a new savings account, one I didn't name emergency or vacation, but just labeled with a single word: enough. And somewhere in the middle of that grind, between pain management and deadlines and the quiet ache of betrayal that wouldn't leave my chest, I began to think about legacy, about image. About the roles we play in families and how they become prisons if you never break them. My parents loved being the generous ones, the church volunteers, the respected retirees who always looked put together. They built a narrative around themselves that said, "We take care of our family." And I realized with a kind of sick clarity that the best way to hurt someone who only values image is to crack the mirror they live in. I wasn't ready yet, but the idea had taken root. And when it bloomed, it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be quiet. Precise. I wasn't going to scream or cry or make a scene. I was going to open the curtains and let everyone else see what I'd been living with for 31 years. And I'd do it in a way they couldn't control. Because if they were so proud of how they treated their family, maybe it was time to show the world what that really looked like. It's strange how, after a while, pain becomes a kind of background noise, constant, familiar, something you carry around like an old sweater you don't like, but still wear because it's the only thing that fits. That was me by midsummer, walking through life with a quiet fury under my skin and a body that no longer did what I asked of it, pretending everything was fine while nursing a rage so tightly packed that even I didn't realize how much it was shaping me. I wasn't dramatic about it. I didn't post vague quotes online or blast sad songs or send long guilt-ridden messages to my parents, begging them to explain themselves. I knew they wouldn't. And more than that, I knew they didn't think they'd done anything wrong. That's what really burned, their belief that I'd just become distant, as if emotional distance were something that happens in a vacuum and not a consequence of repeated choices. Like the problem wasn't that they'd left me behind, it was that I'd had the audacity to notice. By late July, my lease was up, and I decided not to renew it. My apartment had become a place full of memories that felt too loud, moments of hope, of phone calls that didn't go the way I needed, of long nights researching foundations and state medical grants that might cover partial treatment. So I packed everything I owned into a rental van and moved into a smaller, older place on the edge of town. It wasn't much to look at: creaky floors, outdated tile, a suspicious stain near the back window, but it was mine. It was quiet. And, more importantly, it was a place where I didn't have to look at the shadows of people who weren't coming to help. I didn't tell anyone in my family I was moving. There were no housewarming invites, no cute new place, who dis messages. I slipped out of that life the way you slip out of a room at a party you never wanted to be at in the first place, quietly, deliberately, without apologies. It felt good in a small, bitter way. Like closing a door and locking it behind me for the first time. I was still sick, still exhausted, still angry, but at least I was doing it on my terms. Freelancing became my new rhythm. I picked up project after project, designing logos for realtors and dentists, and one strangely intense local bakery that insisted I try every single muffin before choosing a color scheme. I wasn't making a fortune, but I was surviving. And every time a payment cleared, I moved a little of it into my private savings account, the one I'd labeled enough. Watching that number tick upward, little by little, gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't just saving for bills or emergencies, I was saving for the moment I'd be ready to stop surviving and start speaking. At the same time, I started collecting things not in a hoarding sense, but carefully, methodically, like someone building a case. I scrolled back through years of emails, texts, birthday cards with backhanded compliments, and social media posts dripping with pride over things my brother had done, things that, if I'd done them, would have barely registered as notable. I screen captured everything. I archived voicemails. I made a spreadsheet that mapped financial contributions my parents had made over the last 10 years to Trevor, to Ashley, to church fundraisers, to their alma mater, contrasted neatly against the list of times I had asked for help and been turned away. I wasn't sure what I'd do with all of it yet, but I knew one day I would. There was something sickly satisfying about building a ledger of inequity, like holding up a mirror to a house that swore it had no cracks. And then, in early August, my mother showed up at my door. It was a Thursday. I hadn't told her where I lived, which meant she'd either asked Trevor or looked it up through some old contact info. I saw her through the peephole, still tall, still immaculately dressed in beige slacks and a linen blouse, like she was ready to step into a garden party instead of an uncomfortable conversation. I didn't answer the door. I stood behind it, silent, heart racing, every muscle in my body taut with something I couldn't quite name. She knocked twice, then waited. After a minute, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. I waited until I heard her walk away before I listened. "Hi, honey," she began, her voice light, careful, too sweet. "I just wanted to drop by and see you. It's been so long. Your dad and I have been worried. You've been distant, and we're not sure why. We miss our daughter. Can you call me when you have time?" I didn't. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't respond at all. Because the truth was, I didn't miss her. I missed the idea of her. The version of my mother that I used to imagine existed, the one who noticed when I was hurting, who showed up without being asked, who didn't equate love with showmanship or social capital. But that version of her was dead. Maybe she never existed at all. And the woman at my door? She wasn't there because she'd had a change of heart. She was there because, for the first time, I'd stopped playing my part in their story, and the absence of my role was disrupting the narrative they wanted the world to see. I replayed the voicemail once, then deleted it. The messages kept coming in waves. Sometimes they were benign, asking about weather or recipes. sometimes more overt, referencing family events I wasn't invited to, as though casually name-dropping my exclusion might prompt me to beg for a seat at the table. My father finally chimed in with a message that made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so perfectly him. Don't let something petty like money ruin what we have. Life's too short for grudges. As if what we had was something I could afford to ruin. As if what they'd done was petty. As if a grudge was something that formed from one small mistake, and not the accumulation of years of being quietly sidelined, neglected, then finally discarded when I dared to need them back. That's when I knew I had crossed the threshold. I wasn't angry in the reactive, explosive way anymore. I was angry like embers steady, glowing, hot enough to outlast the storm. And embers, given enough time and oxygen, can turn into fire. That was the fire I carried with me when Trevor messaged again, this time with a new kind of entitlement. Hey, Ash is trying to reuse the RSVP site you set up for that other cousin's wedding. Do you still have the logins? Would save us some time. As if nothing had happened. As if I were just a family assistant, on standby to support their next big moment. As if my silence had meant nothing. This time, I didn't just ignore it. I wrote back, no, I don't have it anymore. Try figuring it out yourself. No smiley face. No punctuation polish. Just the truth. He never replied. But that small message, that refusal to pretend everything was fine, it was the first real act of rebellion I'd ever made in that family. And it wouldn't be the last. Because for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt like someone standing on dry land, watching the waves crash without pulling me under. And I knew, deep in my gut, that the reckoning was coming. Quietly. Slowly. But absolutely. There's something about people who obsess over appearances that always stuck in my throat like a bone you can't quite swallow. Something about their desperate need to be seen as kind, generous, respectable. Especially by people who don't know them well enough to see past the surface. That always felt more like manipulation than pride. More like performance than principle, and my parents, Linda and Gary, had long since mastered that particular art. Whether it was donating old coats to church drives while ignoring their daughters' pleas for medical help, or volunteering at food banks while their own child rationed medications just to make rent, they had always been more comfortable with the appearance of goodness than the cost of actually practicing it, and nowhere was that more obvious than in the weeks that followed their lavish public celebration of Trevor's wedding. I hadn't spoken to either of them directly in nearly 2 months, and despite their occasional messages, guilt-laced calls, and what I can only describe as passive-aggressive social media tagging, I had remained deliberately distant, insulated within the small, carefully controlled world I was building for myself, freelance work by day, low-effort dinners by night, and in between, an ever-growing collection of digital receipts, emails, voicemails, and screenshot after screenshot of family. Favoritism so blatant it could have been a case study in emotional neglect if I ever decided to publish it. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was watchful, observant, and dangerously calm in a way that would have terrified them if they'd been paying attention, but of course, they weren't. They were too busy preparing for their next performance, the annual church gala. It was something of a tradition in their world, a black tie event hosted by the same self-congratulatory suburban mega church they'd been attending since before Trevor learned to spell his own name. The kind of place where sermons were PowerPoint presentations and the parking lot had valet on Sundays. The kind of church where donations didn't just buy spiritual fulfillment, but also plaques, handshakes from the pastor, and, this year, something even bigger, a legacy donor award. I heard about it not from them, but from a mutual friend, an old high school classmate of mine named Kelly, who still lived in town and had, for some reason I never quite understood, stayed in touch with my mother on Facebook. Kelly texted me a photo one morning, a grainy screenshot from a post my mother had made, Linda in a navy gown, my father beside her in a stiff tuxedo, both of them standing next to a banner that read, in ornate gold script, honoring generations of giving. Under the image, a caption that felt like a punch in the throat, so honored to be recognized by our church for our commitment to family and faith. Nothing matters more than the legacy we leave behind. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just the hypocrisy that stunned me, it was the smugness, The complete lack of awareness, the way they seemed to believe, truly and deeply, that they were exactly who they were pretending to be. It was as if the months of silence, the tears I'd cried alone in the dark, the panic attacks I'd had in bathroom stalls, the sleepless nights I'd spent wondering if I would die before anyone realized I needed help, none of it had happened. Or worse, none of it mattered. Because as long as they looked like good people, they were good people. And to challenge that image, to suggest that their public generosity was built on the bones of private neglect, wouldn't just threaten their reputation. It would unravel the entire story they'd spent their lives telling the world. And maybe, just maybe, themselves. That night, I sat down at my desk with a glass of wine, opened a fresh Word document, and began to compile everything. I wasn't impulsive about it. I didn't blast them on social media or send angry texts. I just documented, slowly and methodically, every moment that contradicted their performance. The day I asked for help and was told I was strong enough to figure it out. The voicemail where my mother reminded me that they were on a fixed income weeks before wiring tens of thousands of dollars to Trevor and Ashley. The receipt my father sent to Trevor for the wedding venue that he paid directly, signed and dated. The thank you card Ashley had posted online, praising Gary and Linda, the best in-laws a girl could ask for, with a note that they'd even covered the fireworks. I gathered screenshots, emails, timestamps, family group chat exchanges, everything. It took hours. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I entered something close to a trance, not because I was angry, though I was, but because I needed to feel like I had some kind of agency, some control over the narrative that had been twisted and weaponized against me for years. By the time the sun came up, I had a neatly organized 20-page document. Nothing sensational, nothing exaggerated, just facts. Dates, transactions, direct quotes, and most importantly, contrast. What they did for Trevor versus what they didn't do for me. What they gave, what they withheld. The image they projected versus the reality they constructed behind closed doors. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I wrote an anonymous email, created a throwaway Gmail account, and sent that document, along with a short, politely worded explanation, to the wife of the pastor. Not the pastor himself, who I knew would be more concerned with optics and damage control, but his wife, a woman with a reputation for being discerning, quietly judgmental, and, most importantly, not easily manipulated by charm. The email didn't accuse, didn't demand, didn't even name names beyond what was necessary. It simply asked a question. Before you honor someone's legacy, shouldn't you understand the full weight of what they've done and what they've chosen not to do? I didn't hear back. I didn't need to. A week later, the announcement of the Legacy Donor Award was quietly removed from the church's website. My parents' names disappeared from the gala program. My mother posted a vague, melodramatic status about disappointments and false rumors, which was followed by a flurry of supportive comments from friends who had no idea what was going on. Trevor texted me the next day, "Did you say something to the church? Mom's having a meltdown." I didn't reply. I just stared at the message, watched the typing bubble flicker on and off, then disappeared entirely. They didn't know it was me. Or maybe they suspected. Maybe deep down, they recognized the fingerprints of someone who'd spent their entire life being quiet, obedient, and compliant, someone who, when she finally decided to speak, did so with the kind of precision that couldn't be ignored. I didn't do it to ruin them. I didn't do it for revenge, exactly. I did it because I needed them to really know, that they couldn't control the story anymore. That I wasn't going to be the silent, invisible daughter they kept in the wings while they performed sainthood center stage. They wanted to be remembered. And now, they would be. Just not in the way they expected. For the first time in my life, I felt something like peace, not the kind that comes from forgiveness or reconciliation, but the kind that comes from clarity, from finally seeing your parents not as gods or heroes, but as people, flawed and selfish and scared. And knowing that you are no longer trapped by the version of yourself they needed you to be. I wasn't finished. Not yet. But the stage had shifted. And this time, I was the one holding the spotlight. In the weeks that followed the quiet erasure of my parents' name from the church gala program, The air around everything changed, not with the fanfare of an explosion, but with the eerie stillness that comes after one, the kind that makes you aware, suddenly and sharply, of every small sound, every quiet movement, as if the silence itself is watching to see what you'll do next. I didn't reach out, and neither did they, at least not directly. My mother, who had once texted me every other day with benign updates and sentimental pleasantries, fell uncharacteristically quiet, her chirpy digital presence replaced by vague, cryptic Facebook statuses about people who forget who helped them rise. And how betrayal always comes wearing a familiar face, declarations that landed somewhere between martyrdom and mild hysteria. My father remained characteristically stoic, saying nothing, staying invisible in the digital world, but I imagined his silence held a fury of its own, the kind that builds. Behind clenched jaws and thick walls of denial, the kind that resents being outmaneuvered by the child they'd taught to keep her mouth shut and her expectations lower than her brother's waistline at a job interview. They didn't know for sure that it was me, and maybe that was the best part, that lingering uncertainty, that gnawing suspicion they couldn't prove, the seed of doubt that would sit between them during their polished dinner parties and church committee meetings, casting a shadow over their every charitable boast, a quiet reminder that their narrative was no longer invincible. I hadn't burned the house down, not yet, but I had cut the power, dimmed the lights, and made sure the audience finally saw the cracks in the foundation. That was enough for now. The truth is, I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. There's no clean euphoria in revealing the worst parts of your family, no real satisfaction in stripping away the facade when the cost has always been your own loneliness, your own bleeding heart laid bare beneath all the documentation and silence. What I felt was heavier than victory, but steadier than despair, a kind of quiet resolve that I was, for the first time in my life, living in alignment with my own story, no longer biting my tongue to maintain a peace that never existed, no longer shrinking myself to fit into the cramped little box of their expectations, and absolutely no longer pretending that family was a magic word that erased betrayal. What they didn't know was that during all the noise they'd made about my coldness, I had been slowly building a new kind of warmth elsewhere, a network of online friends from chronic illness communities who understood the strange, maddening isolation of invisible disease, colleagues and clients who valued my time and work without measuring it against my last name or my ability to smile through pain, even the woman at the pharmacy who, over time, learned my name and my preferred generic brands, and always remembered to ask how I was doing, even when she was swamped and the line behind me was long. None of these people owed me anything, and yet they gave freely, consistently, without fanfare. It made me realize something I hadn't dared to believe before, that love, real love, isn't a debt to be collected, but a choice made again and again in small, often invisible ways. One night, when the wind outside rattled the loose frame of my tiny apartment window and the city felt impossibly quiet, I sat down and wrote a blog post. I didn't use names, didn't aim for drama, I just told the truth. It was titled, "When You're Too Expensive to Save But Not to Brag About," and in it, I laid out my story in the kind of language that made people stop and feel something deep in their ribs, the moment you ask for help and see someone flinch. The moment you realize that love isn't always symmetrical, the ache of knowing your worth is conditional on how easy you are to celebrate. I hit publish with shaking hands and expected nothing, but within 2 days, it had over 10,000 shares. Messages flooded in, some from strangers who had lived versions of my story, some from people who'd never considered the quiet violence of family favoritism, but now couldn't unsee it. Some messages were hard to read. One woman wrote about her parents letting her car be repossessed while wiring money to her brother for a Vegas bachelor party, but most were just people reaching out to say, "I thought I was the only one." And isn't that the deepest relief of all? Knowing your pain isn't unique, even if your family made it feel that way. My parents never brought it up directly, but I know they saw it. How could they not? A post with that kind of reach doesn't float quietly past people who refresh Facebook like a morning ritual. And Trevor, whose ego had always been skin-deep and glass-fragile, finally broke the silence in a burst of faux concern masked as confrontation, texting me one afternoon, "Mom's devastated. Dad hasn't been himself. Are you happy now? You've always been so dramatic. I stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen, before finally replying with a single sentence that I meant more than anything I had ever written to either of them. I've never been happier to be misunderstood. Then I blocked him. For good. The final message came a few weeks later, in the form of a text from my father, a man who had, over the years, learned to weaponize silence more effectively than any raised voice or slammed door. The message was short, clinical, lacking his usual passive-aggressive warmth. You've made your point. But remember, inheritance is a choice. I read it once, then twice. Not because I didn't understand it, but because it was so predictable, so devoid of irony, that it almost made me laugh. I imagined him typing it with that old smug sense of control, the belief that legacy was a leash and I was still the obedient daughter who could be snapped back into place with the threat of financial exclusion. But what he didn't understand, and what I had come to know with painful clarity, was that I no longer wanted what they had to give. I didn't want the house, the trust, the second-hand antiques, or the safety net that had never actually been there when I needed it. I wanted my own life, my own peace, my own voice. And I had already inherited something far more valuable than anything they could put in a will, the knowledge that silence, when broken with intention, can do more than destroy, it can rebuild. So I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I deleted the message, turned off my phone, and sat on the floor of my quiet apartment with a bowl of cold cereal and a soft playlist humming from the corner, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt completely, undeniably free. They'll never understand what they lost. They'll never admit it. To this day, I'm sure they tell their friends I cut them off for no reason, that I was too sensitive, that I've changed. And they're right, I have changed, but not in the way they mean. I'm not colder. I'm just no longer warming myself by the fire of people who only let me near it when it suits them. I'm not broken. I'm just finally done being bent to fit their frame. And in that final silence, deafening and clean, I found everything I'd been searching for all along. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. But myself.